Everybody, I'm Brent.
And I'm Bo.
And this is Rough and Tumble Joy. It's Thursday, and we're really glad that you have plugged in with us today as we continue our walk through Philippians. We are still in the third chapter, kind of about getting ready to wrap it up. We should be able to do that by tomorrow for sure. Some really great things that have been already in this third chapter of Philippians about the law and how it doesn't bring salvation and how we ought to press on to become great, not because we want to earn heaven, but because we want to honor God. Right? It's kind of where we left off yesterday.
So we're going to pick up today, as you look in your Bibles, we're being Philippians 3. We're going to be looking at verses 15 through 19. And in the ESV here, it says this: "Let those of us who are mature think this way, and if anything you think otherwise, God will reveal that also to you. Only let us hold true to what we have attained. Brothers, join in imitating me, and keep your eyes on those who walk according to the example you have in us. For many of whom I have often told you, and now tell you even with tears, walk as enemies of the cross of Christ. Their end is destruction. Their God is their belly, and they glory in their shame with minds set on earthly things."
That's good. I like what the NLT says here, and we'll get back to it in just a minute. But the beginning of this is kind of a follow from yesterday. Let us all who are spiritually mature agree on these things. Mm-hmm. And what he's saying is, if you understand, of course, that you should live for Christ and you should live a passionate life for Him, but this doesn't earn your salvation, but it's the right response to God. And he said, you should agree about this. And then he kind of, a little bit of a dig, and if you don't, eventually God will show you that you're wrong and I'm right about this. Right?
Sure,
That's kind of what he's saying. Right?
Yeah, and that word mature there in verse 15, does your Bible say?
Yes,
mature
it's mature.
Well? Okay,
Mm-hmm.
So the word mature in the Greek is also the same word for perfect. Mm-hmm. So what he's saying here is, let those of us who are perfect think this way. Now, he just said in verse 12, I am not perfect. Mm-hmm. And so what he's trying to say is, you really know that you're perfect and that you're walking with Jesus when you realize how far you still have to go. And there's a lot that you're still going to learn. There's a lot you're still going to realize through trials and through suffering. And I just pray that God will reveal that to you along the path, and that you will continue to be more perfect, more mature in your relationship with Christ.
And I think that Paul kind of connects actions that are good actions and moral character development with also the accomplishment of the purpose that God has for his life and his mission. Okay. Right? And so there's some senses like the perfection is not just that I am morally perfect, but it also is that I have run the race, I've finished the task, I've done the thing for which I was called, and I'm just not there yet. Sure. My moral maturity is a part of that, but so is my progression toward accomplishing the task that I've been given, and all these things are a part of getting to the finish line. So then he goes on and he says, in my translation, he says, "Dear brothers and sisters, pattern your lives after me and learn from those who follow my example." And Paul said this in more than one place. Follow me as I follow Christ in another location, right? Mm-hmm. So this idea that you can look to the way that I follow Jesus and get some encouragement from it. And then he says, "For I have told you often before, and I say it again with tears in my eyes." He's so passionate about this, so much emotion in what he's having to say, that there are many whose conduct shows that they are really enemies of the cross of Christ. They're headed for destruction. Their God's their appetite. They brag about shameful things, and they think only about this life here on earth. And so that's interesting, these things that he's put out here in front of us. Again, this emotion. Tell me about your response to the fact that he wants to interject again this idea that there's tears in his eyes about when he thinks about this aspect of the people he knows and maybe those in Philippi who fall in this other category.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just because it's the struggle, right? Like he's trying to get people to surrender to Jesus and Jesus alone. And we talked about this on Monday and a little bit on Tuesday. This Jesus plus nothing equals everything. And yet they have turned their eyes off of Jesus. They have now made their God their belly, which is a really powerful metaphor here, that their appetites and what they desire, essentially they have made themselves a God, and they follow what they desire and what their will is. And so he's struggling because he's trying to lead people towards Jesus, but yet these others are now enemies, so much so that they have made themselves God. They are following what they think is right. Their glory is actually shame. Their minds not godly, earthly, and their end not good, but destruction. And so it shows us he's not above them. he's actually empathizing for them, and he hurts and he grieves for them.
You know, Jesus tells this parable, the parable of the wheat and the weeds, or the wheat and the tares, sure. Right? And it says, you know, you look out and you see this field, and you think you planted all this great seed, and then when it comes up, there's always weeds. I've got a garden we've started, Bo. You know, like half of America, we've got our coronavirus garden, and we've planted these plants, and they're beautiful, and they're kind of starting out. Some of them are coming up, but there's also some weeds that are coming up, right, that are there in the midst. We didn't plant those, but there they are. And so I think for Paul, he looks at Philippi and he says, we planted all of this great great seed. There were people that I thought were coming up, and they were going to be wheat. They're going to be believers. They're going to multiply. But now we can see that they're actually enemies of the cross.
Right.
They're not followers of Jesus Christ. They're in the church. They're around the church. We thought they were Christians, but it turns out that they're not. They're actually enemies of the cross. What powerful language. Like, what's he trying to say? This enemy of the cross. I mean, it's punchy.
Yeah, and I think the reality is some of them are being swayed by this, and this happens to us today. We have people in our lives, maybe we give them a little too much authority in our lives. Maybe we look or we surrender ourselves to various people's teaching. I mean, it's very popular now to get online and follow a preacher or follow a church or follow a movement, and maybe we haven't investigated enough what's going on. And so he's saying, look, I want you to follow people who are walking toward Christ and look more like Christ, not just people that make you feel good or make you think good things or make you think that it's about you, because they're actually these people. And so I think really what's going on too, like you're saying, is the weeds have been growing up in Philippians, and some of these good plants, some of this good harvest is starting to look toward the weeds and start to look and say, well, maybe they've got it right, and maybe I should listen to them. And they're kind of cross-pollinating, and they're beginning to bring maybe some of this into their life. And he's saying it's cut and dry. There's one way and there's another way. Now follow this way. Actually be imitators of the people of this way, and you'll end up looking more like that healthy.
I think it's fascinating because in this one chapter, he lays out the two different sort of temptations that are always out there in every generation.
Yeah.
There's a temptation in the Christian life to be a legalist, and that is to be all about the law, and you do the law because you want to impress people and not because you love Jesus. The motivation's wrong for you doing the right things. But the other temptation is what I might say is licentiousness. I only use it because it's two L's, and it's, you know, anytime you get to alliterate, you should.
Okay.
But you've got legalism, which is all about the law, and you've got licentiousness, which is all about a liberty that says I can live any way I want to live.
Okay.
I can live a terrible life if I want to live a terrible life. I don't have to follow any sense of morality or have to do what's good. And so within this one chapter, we've got both kinds of people that are threatening the church: legalists and those that are living a kind of lifestyle that is absent any moral code or any sense of morality. Their God is their stomach, he says. Mm-hmm. They just do whatever feels good. And it's as fresh as if it was written yesterday, because this is still the threat in the church, right? And there are churches, whole groups of believers that bend toward legalism, and there are whole churches of believers that lead toward this idea of just living any way you want to live and no morality really at all. And Paul's saying these are both a threat to the church. You got to find this other place, this third way, which is the Christian path. And a morality that's always built on love. My love for God keeps me from believing that it's about my good works. My love for God keeps me from living any old way that I want to and allowing my desires to be my God, my director.
And it's another really strong push to the church here that you have those ways, right? You have legalism, you have licentiousness, right?
Hard to say, but you did it pretty well.
Antinomianism. That's a longer word.
Also not very helpful, right?
Yeah, to look it up at home. But, his third way, which I think is fascinating, is look to the people around you. And it's funny because he doesn't say look toward Jesus, because you can't see Jesus, but you can see Jesus in others. And this is true because when you listen to a sermon and then all of a sudden the pastor starts to tell you a story about his life, everyone looks up. Everyone's eyes look up. Everyone connects because they're looking at him and they're seeing his personal story and they're connecting with that and they're thinking, oh, well, I can connect with that. Mm-hmm. We read the word. Sometimes it's hard to connect with. So for me and in my life, I love finding these great men and women of the faith and looking to them and how they walked, because they kind of show me more about how I need to walk. There's a biography called Bonhoeffer that is phenomenal. I have read it 2 times now, and when I read it, it really impresses me with how this man lived his life. and it makes me want to follow him because he followed Jesus so well. And so you need other people around you. You need examples around you that you're looking toward. You can't be a lone Christian, and you need these the believers to show you different ways to love Jesus more and more.
Yeah. All right. Well, so this is what we got today. These two different ways that we could go that aren't the way to go. Don't be a legalist and be driven by the law. Don't be someone that lives a life without any sense of moral passion. Don't allow your God to be your stomach.
Right.
Right. Your God to be your stomach. Yes. Your stomach to be your God. Yes,
yeah.
That's the way I want to say that. Right, instead, and that would be your kind of your fleshly passions. That's what he's saying. Instead, let your love for God direct your moral code, and let that be the reason for why you live the way that you did. Really glad that you're here. One more section here in the 3rd chapter tomorrow as we wrap up the week. We'll look forward to seeing you then.